Welcome, 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 lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome to the second live book reading today. Um, and we are continuing our story from this marvelous book, I must say, the story of ISIS and the war on bloodlines. And uh-oh. Today the title is in actuality the On the Priory of Sion and the Knights Templar. So let us start. All right. And then I know. Much can be said about the Priory of Sion, but I will not go into every detail about this order. And with I is mentioned the writer of this book itself, Wes Penry. Many prominent artists became members of the order over time, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Victor Hugo, both grandmasters, and scientists such as Isaac Newton. We often see esoteric paintings from medieval times having much esoteric symbolism in them. These artists were, of course, either Templars, members of the Priory of Sion, Rosicrucians, or they belonged to some other offspring from any of the above, all there to protect the royal bloodline. The more I investigate this, the more all tributaries of the river seem to connect at the same point. So the Priory of Sion turned into the Knights Templar, who later, with the Priory of Sion, created the York Rite of Freemasonry, led by the Templars. The Grand Lodge of England, where Prince Philip was the Grand Master, is also essentially a Templar order. The Priory of Sion located themselves in Jerusalem after the Catholic Church's First Crusade in 1099. A few decades later, they formed the Knights Templar to protect the Holy Grail, eventually trying to reinstate the Merovingians, ultimately defeating the Church of Rome. So not all Templars turned against the Church after the excavation of Solomon's temple between 1119 and 1128. So, however, since they branded out, the reason for this may be clear to the reader in time, but first we must address what happened after the excavation of Solomon's temple between 1119 and 1128. So, around 1118, a French knight named Hugues the Payens created a military order along with 8 relatives and acquaintances, calling it the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, later known simply as the Knights Templar. The order quickly grew as new members were recruited and became the front for the Priory of Sion, which is an order, probably going back as far as Old Babylon and Mesopotamia. Perhaps this order was first established by Enki, as Osiris when he and Isis created their particular bloodline, and their purpose was to protect it. The following is from a website called the Templar Knight. So of it, other accounts linking the Templars to the Holy Grail view it as secret knowledge hidden in Jerusalem that gave the Templars huge power over the church and accounts for their sudden increase in wealth. It goes something like this. 1. The Templars were Gnostics, influenced by an early form of Christianity that sought to liberate the soul through a true understanding of the divine, and did not recognize the earthly priesthood of the Roman Church. 2. The 9 knights who founded the order deliberately based themselves in what had been the Al-Aqsa Mosque under Muslim control, but was in fact the site of the Temple of Solomon. Having obtained permission from Baldwin, the Crusader ruler of the city, to take over the building, they began ferociously digging underneath it. And then 3, they found something that allowed them to go to Rome and extract concessions from the papacy. This might have been a gospel written by Jesus himself. It may have been the Ark of the Covenant. Yes, the Templars were Gnostics, or at least a branch of them were. Therefore, I believe they found Gnostic texts underneath Solomon's temple during the excavations, and because a branch of the Templars became followers of the Mother Goddess religion, I would suspect it was the Nag Hammadi texts, which they later, during the Inquisition of the Templar Order by the Catholic Church in the early 14th century, hid together with other Templar treasures. Knights might have sailed to Egypt and dug these texts down in Nag Hammadi, only to be found in 1945. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts, which introduces the Mother Goddess into the overall divine story of the universe, and most likely other artifacts referring to the divine feminine, contributed to the knights' conversion to Mother Goddess worship. Yes, sadly, it seems they went into worship, because in actuality, the Mother Goddess does not like to be worshipped. Not all Templars changed their religious beliefs, however, the branch did took advantage of the situation and could extract concessions from the papacy, and they got wealthy, also going into banking, lending out money to a high interest. Soon they became the wealthiest organization on earth, save from the Catholic Church itself. So in actuality, you can say the Catholic Church is the second wealthiest organization. Although the Church of Rome was most likely aware of the divine feminine, they held it secret to instead promote a masculine god, and it was not meant to happen for the Templars to find the truth under the temple. So, as we have discussed earlier, the Church of Rome, with local popes positioned in different provinces of the Roman Empire, worships both Mary and Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene, which are one and the same, and Jesus. They are an Isis-Marduk cult, which is based on Magdalene-Jesus cult. Protectors of the Holy Grail, with the Priory of Sion and the Templars, as well as in current times the Rosicrucians, the Rosecrux, and other occult organizations. They are all connected and sit on the same kind of information, only presented differently. It appears to me that one branch of the Templars who continued following the Church took the male god approach, while another branch took a grander approach, seeing through that Isis is the cosmic mother, or maybe they even realized she was an extension of the cosmic mother herself, since this is conveyed in the Nag Hammadi. The latter branch understood the differences, and also that the Church knew about it, kept it secret, making sure they acknowledged Enki as God and not the Queen of the Stars, Sophia. When I mentioned that the Templars also might have found something else underneath the temple, it could have been evidence of the much purer Ninurta and Isis bloodline. Isis, hermaphroditic creation of the red heads. They understood that this was the bloodline that deserved to be protected, not the Marduk Isis Ninurta lineage that the Church focused on. It has been much talk about that the Templars found a genealogy chart of Jesus' bloodline all the way to King David, and perhaps they did. But the real Graal is the connection to the true Mother Goddess through Isis and Ninurta. If such a discovery happened, which seems likely, taking into consideration what we soon are going to discuss. The Mother Goddess worshippers among the Templars did not actively try to destroy the Catholic Church, but they worked slowly behind the scenes. It is more than possible the Church knew the Templars had this evidence in their possession, and the order used it as blackmail. They kept the information hidden, and perhaps they threatened to expose the Church as a fraudulent, or at least a false religion, which would, of course, be devastating. Thus, the Templar order could gain tremendous wealth, reluctantly provided to them by the Church. Thus, two different bloodlines were now protected by different branches of the Templars, respectively creating two opposing branches. They were essentially just one bloodline, which is the Jesus-Magdalene lineage. It was a matter of perspective, such as who is divine, Jesus or Mary Magdalene. An important stronghold for the Templars was a place in France called Rennes-le-Château, with the skull and crossbones symbol and the Ninurta cross above the entrance. This is an old Templar symbol, which they also used on their ship sails. Today we see it in many occult societies, most prominently at the Yale secret society, the so-called Skull and Bones, of which the male bushes are part of, and as well as many other famous Lites are and were members of. It is also a symbol of the Jolly Roger, the pirate flag, which again is the Templar symbol, first in use in the early 1700s by the pirate, Emmanuel Winnie. There is much we have not been told about our history. Who were the pirates? Three treated Templars from whom the British Crown stole treasures. The Templars residing in Rennes-le-Château were mostly loyal to the papacy and were left alone, not being arrested in what led to the prosecution of the order in the early 14th century, while others were not so luckily. So the branch that prioritized the Mother Goddess blood, considering that royal and not the Jesus bloodline, set up their strongholds in Portugal, a country that was created by the Templars, and in Germany, which was at the time not under the influence of the papacy. Then something peculiar happened. So the Mother Goddess branch had a setback in the 1200s, most likely because of their connection to Mother Goddess worship, and they had to flee to Germany and Portugal for safety. Thus they could prolong the inevitable prosecution, which came to fruition later. The following will probably by many be discarded as superstitious nonsense, but it is not necessarily so. The German knights, on more than one occasion, saw an apparition appear before them, and this apparition spoke to them. As we know, taking my research into consideration, the overlords, including Isis, knew how to shapeshift and take form in our reality. This appears to have happened. Interestingly, this apparition called herself Isis. So the Untersberg is a great mountain straddling the Austro-German border. Opposite Salzburg, it was reputed in local legend to be the seat of the god Wotan and to be haunted. The Knights Templar of the region had their headquarters in Vienna, and before the year 1222 never had a Komturei, a command post, near the mountain. So the commander of a so-called section returning from the Crusades to Austria in 1220 received an apparition believed to be of the demigoddess Isis at Nineveh, Old Babylon, who instructed him to proceed to the Untersberg and erect a temple in her honor inside it. There she would address them frequently, which she did as from 1226. So the appearance of Isis to the German knights. Sometimes in the year 1220, the German Knight Templar and commander Hubertus Koch, returning to Austria from the Crusaders with a small company, arrived at the ruins of the former Assyrian capital Nineveh in ancient Babylon. Here he reports being approached by an apparition of the demigoddess Isis, a graceful, maiden-like figure of a girl whose copper-colored hair waved as if in a breeze, although the day was actually windless. She gave Koch instructions to proceed to the mountain of the old god Wotan, that is the Untersberg near Salzburg. Build a house there and await her next apparition, where she would give important information regarding a new, between quotation marks, golden age for the world. The first testified apparition of Isis at Untersberg occurred in the year 1226 and was repeated regularly over the next 12 years. Isis delivering the full 134 verses of her revelation by 1238. The supposed purpose of Isis was to help achieve the destruction of the powers of darkness in the heavens and on earth. And as a first step, the world had to be rid of the Church of Rome, since it worshipped Jehovah/Yahweh/Yahuwah as God Almighty. Yeah. The underlying basis of the Isis revelation is the Marcionite heresy of the 2nd century AD. It denies that the Hebrew God of the Old Testament, always referred to in the Revelation as El Shaddai, was God of the New Testament. So Isis states that it was Al-Vater, the Al-Vater, God himself, who descended in human form as the, between quotation marks, All Christ, Jesus Christ, and was crucified by those he had come to reform. So the apparition was a figure clothed in a breath-fine dress of shimmering green, such that one could perceive the outline of a tall female, slim and supple, shining through it. She was a wonderful being, half woman and half girl, and undoubtedly not of this world. Her beautiful face was narrow and pallid and absolutely wonderful. Her eyes and her hair and her fingernails shone with the color of amber. A golden tiara held back the masses of her hair, which reached to the ground, and on top of the tiara was a golden crescent moon, with points like horns, and at its center a golden sun. Her unhumanly large eyes stared at us, and her lips seemed to be glowing. And she was the most beautiful picture that a person ever saw, but she was translucent and not of humankind. She said, I called you here without you being aware of it, at which Roderick asked for her identity. She answered at once, I am Isai or Isis or Ishtar. The folk who revered me, better said, in this place called me Asherah. The people in the north who were your ancestors knew me as Idun. Idun, Nordic goddess of the clan Aesir. Different peoples named me as suited their own language. Then German knight Amarant said that they were both true to the Lord Jesus Christ and would never worship another deity. Ishtar/Isis, apparently amused, replied, I heard your prayers to him, to my godlike brother, but he is in his realm, while I, his godlike sister, am here again for a short while, for ultimately it is female power which will defeat Jehovah slash Yahweh slash Satan and all those people who call Yahweh Yahuwah. It is all the same person, the same being. Marduk. The goddess of love will change into a goddess of war to strike down Satan/Marduk when the moment comes in. After this, it was mostly the German and Austrian Templar branches that started despising the church more openly. It is said the Templars were suddenly, according to the church, practicing heresy, homosexuality, financial corruption, devil worshipping, fraud, spitting on the cross, and more. They were also accused of denying Christ. This is probably true, at least from the church's perspective, but the real downfall of the Templars was their greed. They lent money to monarchies, and they put everybody in debt whom they came in contact with. The interest upon delayed payments was ridiculous high, which prevented countries from being able to balance the debt. Does this sound familiar? Yes, because each and every country in this world is in huge debts. Look at America, for instance, the debt that country has, that is enormous. This is how they put entire countries in debt today. King Philip IV, who lived from 1268 to 1314, of France, the ruler of one such country, being in enormous debt, was tired of the knights' usury. He wanted to destroy the Templars completely to get rid of the debt, and he was also the one who accused the Templars of heresy and all the other accusations mentioned above. So it seems plausible that he infiltrated the order and found actual clues to what was going on. Rome was still a great empire, and France was a part of it. However, the French monarchy stood above the papacy. Monastic military order whose original role as protectors of Christian pilgrims in the Latin East had been largely replaced by banking and other commercial activities. By the end of the 13th century, as the popularity of the Crusades had decreased, support for the military orders had waned, and Philip used as disgruntled complaint against the Knights Templar as an excuse to move against the entire organization as it existed in France. In part to free himself from his debts, other motives appear to have included concern over perceived heresy, assertion of French control over a weakened papacy, and finally the substitution of royal officials for officers of the temple in the financial management of French government. Recent studies emphasize the political and religious motivations of Philip the Fair and his ministers, especially Guillaume de Nogaret. It seems that with the discovery and repression of the Templars' heresy, the Capetian monarchy claimed for itself the mystic foundations of the papal theocracy. The temple case was the last step of a process of appropriating these foundations, which had begun with the Franco-papal rift. At the time of Bonifacius the Eighth, being the ultimate defender of the Catholic faith, the Capetian king was invested with a Christ-like function that put him above the Pope. What was at stake in the Templars' trial, then, was the establishment of a royal theocracy. So, in 1303, King Philip kidnapped and murdered Pope Boniface the Eighth, and most likely a second local pope as well. Then the king used his influence over Pope Clement V and forced him into agreeing to a prosecution of the Templars, since the Pope was only his puppet. The Pope, however, wanted to hold proper trials, still after having arrested several Templars, leading to confessions of heresy and more under torture. King Philip IV used these forced confessions to have these Templars burned at the stake before they could form a defense. Then the church, under Philip's command, raided the Templar facilities, trying to find treasures and so-called curiosa in their possessions. But they found many Templars had fled, and there were no treasures or relics found anywhere. It was later discovered that some members of the order had sailed to sea under the Templar flag with the treasures and were never heard from again. Some suspect the Catholic Church discovered them and caught them at sea, confiscating their valuable cargo, but no one knows for certain. Whatever the truth is, it appears the Templars were forewarned, perhaps having spies within France's royal court, so they could disappear before the church invaded and arrested those who stayed behind. Others, who still were on Roman territory, fled to their companions in Germany and Portugal. A faction of the order had a tragic end, as most of the readers might know, and it was officially dismantled in disgrace in 1314 on March the 11th. The Catholic Church burned at the stake the Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay, and with him many other knights. Interestingly, no Templars in Rennes-le-Château and its vicinity were ever prosecuted. That part of the order was still in favor of the Catholic Church and the worship of the male God and Jesus. After the horrific end, surviving Templars worshipping the goddess went underground or laid low. Eventually, some of them went to England and Scotland, where they were protected by Robert the Bruce, King of Scots. For those who want more evidence that the persecuted Templars were Mother Goddess worshippers, please read the following quote. Here they talk about the, between quotation marks, Venus family. Venus is a Roman goddess who was also the Greek goddess Aphrodite, who in Egypt was Isis. Venus/Isis is also associated with copper, red hair. And if you go back to the quote about the Isis apparition showing herself to the Templars, she was associated with copper as well. So here is the quotation. The persecuted Knights Templar and the families they were members of were what we now collectively call the so-called Venus families. So why Venus? The planet Venus has always been considered the manifestation of the great goddess in the heavens since humans first began to watch and track the celestial bodies in the night sky. Venus is the third brightest body after the sun and the moon, and moves in ways that makes patterns such as the five-pointed star or pentagram if tracked over its 8-year cycle, a symbol long associated with goddess ideology. These families and the Templars kept alive an ancient faith where the sacred feminine was considered critically important. At the very least, she was an equal to the male god and maybe even paramount. Because this flew in the face of the controlling Roman Catholic Church in medieval times, which actively pursued and burned at the stake anyone not practicing the dogma of the Church, the Templars needed to keep their reverence for the sacred feminine carefully veiled so as not to endanger themselves or their critical plans. In fact, we find that there is reason to believe the Templars and associated families had a covenant with the great goddess that had to do with helping them finding a new safe place to live, bring their treasures, their families, and worship as they wished. And here it comes, a new Jerusalem, away from the monarchs of Europe and the Catholic Church in exchange for keeping the sacred feminine aspect of their faith alive and well, yet carefully veiled in perpetuity. In Scotland, the Templars created a new order, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, officially established in 1717. Although records are showing it might have been established centuries earlier. So this is what the Freemasons themselves say about it. Quote, "No one knows with certainty how or when the Masonic fraternity was formed. A widely accepted theory among Masonic scholars is that it arose from the stone masons' guilds during the Middle Ages. The language and symbols used in the fraternity's rituals come from this era. The oldest document that makes reference to Masons is the Regius poem, printed about 1390, which was a copy of an earlier work. In 1717, 4 lodges in London formed the first Grand Lodge of England, and records from that point on are more records from that point on are more complete. End quote. And here is the correlation between the Templars and Masonry from the horse's mouth. Quote, "The Knights Templar, full name, the United Religious, Military, and Masonic Orders of the Temple and of Saint John of Jerusalem, Palestine, Rhodes, and Malta, is a fraternal order affiliated with Freemasonry. Ultimately, it is just another branch of the ancient brotherhood, starting with Enki's Brotherhood of the Snake in the early second construct, but the Freemasonic branch of Scotland and England both protect the pure Isis Ninurta bloodline behind the scenes. This is extra interesting because these Templars came to the British islands, to the British islands from Germany. And who is on the throne of England up to this day? The House of Windsor, who is German. Wow. This is extra interesting because these Templars came to the British Islands from Germany. And who is on the throne of England up to this day? The House of Windsor, who is German. Then Westbury writes here, "My Orion source told me that the late Queen Elizabeth thought she was Sophia's representative on earth with her divine right to rule, which he said is utterly false." So she was in actuality doing the same as the Pope did by calling itself the representative of Father God, which is also utterly false. And so this Orion source says, "And she is just another imposter." He further claimed she is not even royal. having no more royal blood than the regular human. Back then, I did not understand what he meant, but now I do, and it will be more obvious later in this book. The name Elizabeth, Elizabeth is also a title for the mother goddess. So we now get a different understanding of names. According to my source in Orion, thus things are truly coming together. Prince Philip, being a member of the English Lodge of Freemasonry while he was alive, therefore protected the bloodline of the House of Windsor. Although Elizabeth II was little more than a commoner in this sense, Prince William and Prince Harry have more royal blood, so I guess Prince Philip protecting the Holy Grail was justified after all. More about this as well when we come to the chapter about the House of Windsor. The supposed Templar Baphomet connection. Although the God of the Old Testament said we humans should not worship idols, the Catholic Church is famous for worshiping them, but so was the Templar order. Many alternative researchers, particularly those who specialize in the Illuminati and the Allied bloodlines, often discuss the Baphomet, an idol Satanists often worship and who is also mentioned in the 20th century magician Aleister Crowley's teachings. Ever since the Catholic Church condemned the Templars, said to have been worshipping the Baphomet, this so-called, between quotation marks, entity has been considered a satanic element. Those who have done research on occult history have most likely come across the Baphomet, allegedly originating with the Knights Templar. The most common picture we have of this figure is the drawing of the occultist, Eliphas Levi from the mid-19th century. Wikipedia says, quote, Peter Partner states in his 1987 book, The Knights Templar and Their Myth, in the trial of the Templars, one of their main charges was their supposed worship of a heathen idol head known as a Baphomet. Baphomet is Mahomet. Mahomet denotes the feminine. Ma is mother. It is important to realize that Levi's depiction of the Baphomet has nothing to do with the Templar version. They are two separate things, except that Levi borrowed the name and idea from the Templars. So, what idol, if any, did the Templars worship? The indictment, act of accusation, published by the court of Rome, set forth that in all the provinces they had idols, that is to say, heads, some of which had 3 faces, others but one. Sometimes it was a human skull, that in their assemblies, and especially in their grand chapters, they worshipped the idol as a so-called god, as their savior, saying that this head could save them, that it bestowed on the order all its wealth, made the trees flower and the plants of the earth to sprout forth. So now let's go back to Wikipedia. The description of the object changed from confession to confession. Some Templars denied any knowledge of it, while others confessed under torture, described it as being either a severed head, a cat, or a head with 3 faces. The Templars did possess several silver gilt heads as reliquaries, including one marked Caput Evium, another said to be Saint Euphemia, and possibly the actual head of Hughes the Payens. The claims of an idol named Baphomet were unique to the Inquisition of the Templars. Karen Rawls, writer of the Knights Templar Encyclopedia, argues that it is significant that no specific evidence of Baphomet appears in either the Templar rule or in other medieval period Templar documents, taking into consideration that the information about the Templars worshipping heads come out under torture. We must take this information with many pinches of salt. People confess to anything under torture, which is then held against them. That is the sad story of humankind. So whether the idol, the so-called Baphomet, was a church invention or a skull worshipped by the Templars is hard to say. Still, there is a probability they did. They were, after all, an occult order with secret levels of initiation, and we know for a fact that Freemasonry and other secret societies use idols in their rituals and initiation processes. There are references to this. Baphomet was formed from the Greek words Baphi-Mitius, to mean Taufi, their Weisheit, so baptism of wisdom. Nikolai attached to it the idea of the image of the supreme God in the state of quietude attributed to him by the Manichaean Gnostics, according to F.J.M. Renoir, and supposed that the Templars had a secret doctrine and initiations of several grades, which the Saracens had communicated to them. He further connected the Figura Baphometi with the Pythagorean pentacle. The Templars were Gnostic, and the Greek translation of Baphomet gives us a reference to wisdom, which is the main Gnostic trait of the spiritual aeon pistis sophia. And moreover, um, what in and moreover, a person known as Hugh J. Schonfield, one of the scholars who worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls, argued in his book The Essene Odyssey that the word Baphomet was created with knowledge of the Atbash substitution cipher, which substitutes the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet for the last, comma, the second for the second last, and so on. Baphomet rendered in Hebrew is BPWMT, interpreted using Atbash. It becomes a Shofya, and then in bold, which is an emphasis of the writer Wes Penry himself, which can be interpreted as the Greek word Sophia, meaning wisdom. That both the Knights Templar and the Freemasons are Gnostics is not a secret, but something they willingly admit to themselves on their own websites and elsewhere, such as at universalfreemasonry.org. Adopting to Gnosticism originates from the Knights Templar, who merged into one larger organization called Freemasonry. All right, and with this said, I have come to the end of this chapter 9. Chapter 10 is all about the Templars and the Holy Grail in the Wes Penry papers. That will be done the next time. I want to thank you for listening along and for tuning in through Facebook, through YouTube, and through Rumble. And thank you so much. I wish you all a beautiful day filled with a lot of love and joy and wisdom and truth and revelations, all coming from your own spirit. And let us listen as last to a wonderful piece of music, which is titled Unbreakable and is coming from Ben Sound. I see you next time. And today I will probably do another last book reading. That's number 3. But this one is all about the living library. This planet is a living library, and we humans are destroying our own living library by believing a psychopathic, malignant, narcissistic fantasy of Enki and Marduk, and also terraforming this planet into their fantasy. All right, see you next time, see you later on the day. And here comes the music.